Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us here today as we provide an update on the COVID-19 as well as do the presentation on the 2021 Erie County proposed budget. We will get to COVID-19 after the budget presentation. As always, we are joined, well, not always, but most of the time, we're joined by Kendra Schmidt from Deaf Access Services to provide the American Sign Language. It's either Kendra or Karen Gambino usually. We are also joined by representatives of our budget staff, including the Budget Director, Robert Keating, and the Deputy Budget Director, Ben Swankamp, and some of the members of the budget staff in the back. And I want to thank all of them for the good work that they've done with what was a very difficult budget to prepare because of the financial conditions that the community and others are facing as a result of COVID-19. Getting right into it, the 2021 proposed budget is $1,473,105,849, which is a significant reduction from the 2020 approved budget that went into effect on January 1, which was $1,554,000,000. So about $80 million difference. And there's also a significant reduction in jobs from what was approved last year that went into effect on January 1. 246 less jobs than what was in the county sphere, so to speak, on January 1. We took action, of course, with regards to a deficit remediation plan in the middle of this year, in which 148 positions were eliminated. There were 98 positions eliminated in the 2021 proposed budget. If you note, you'll see that the deficit remediation plan is a much lower number than what is the 2021 proposed plan, and that is because we were basing it off of originally a projection of upwards of $180 million deficit. That has not come to fruition. We have a very large deficit, but it's not $180 million, thankfully. So based on what we were looking at and the numbers that have come in, as we'll talk about, our budget is significantly less than what was originally proposed for 2020, but it is not as bad as we thought it might be because we have received better sales tax numbers in the last few weeks. But there is unfortunately cuts to jobs as well as, while we believe services will be maintained at the level that people expect, it's going to be a little bit more leaner and efficient for county government because we're going to have less people providing the same amount of services. The expense lines, a lot of people sort of wonder where the money goes to. The vast majority of funding in Erie County government goes to Health and Human Services, including the Social Services Department. $763 million, or approximately 47% of all dollars spent or received by Erie County go for Health and Human Services. The administration and management, which includes the county executive's office and some of the other offices, are one of the smallest components, only 1.5%. You see education and libraries, $54 million. The library, as I will discuss, did receive a slight increase as a result of assessment growth. So the libraries will receive additional funding from 2020. We do pass on any assessment growth to the libraries based on the library portion of the levy, and they are receiving a slight increase. But in other areas, there are cuts. Our revenues, and this is where the money comes from, this breaks it down. You see sales tax makes up the vast majority of revenues for Erie County, $424 million dollars of sales taxes generated and retained by Erie County, while another $349 million is shared with local governments, including all 3 cities, all the towns, all the villages, and school districts. So the news about our sales tax coming in better than what we were projecting is good not just for Erie County, it is good for every city, every town, every village, and every school district. Now it's still down for the year, and as I'll get into in a moment, it's better than we were projecting, but it's still less than what we originally budgeted for. But it is good news that it has rebounded, and as such, it not only benefits Erie County, but it benefits all the municipalities. You'll see a line in there, state aid, $156 million in state aid. Because of the problems that state government has had itself with a $14 billion budget deficit, they have cut 20% of all grants programs that we've received. We have no indication that that won't change in 2021, so we're continuing with a 20% cut in state aid for next year. Now, the stronger than expected sales tax, this is good news for us. It's not as good as we would have liked, but it's still better than what we were facing. If you remember, I've talked about sales tax and where we were. We were looking up until the most recent receipt of money from New York State at an 8.5% reduction in our sales tax compared to 2019, when of course we project always growth over the prior year. So what we were looking at was a substantial drop in sales tax that was having a huge impact on our budget. The state did a reconciliation recently, and as a result of that, we received some significant additional funding, not only for the third quarter, but also for a prior period adjustment. Basically, the way it works is the state has a formula in place. When they get sales tax receipts in, the formula is, well, here's who gets it, usually as a percentage, with New York City getting the largest percentage. And then they split it up. Then they do the reconciliation and figure out, okay, that goes to Erie County, that goes to Suffolk County, that goes to Chautauqua County, this goes to New York City. And when they've done the reconciliation, what they realized is that for most of upstate New York, they previously provided less money than they should have. They gave New York City too much money. So after this most recent adjustment, and basically for the first draw through October, we are seeing a reduction of sales tax of 2.3% compared to 2019. New York City has seen a reduction in sales tax of 18.6%. I would not want to be Bill de Blasio right now, because I don't know how they're going to do their budget when they've seen almost a 20% cut in sales tax. So as a result of this, our sales tax is only down for the fiscal year 2.3%. Now, we had projected growth in the sales tax for 2020 over 2019. So we're down, but we're not as bad as we thought we were going to be. And that's a good thing, because it allowed us to propose a budget that provides the services that the public wants without having to do one of two things, which is slash and burn county government or raise the property tax rate. So thankfully, we don't have to slash and burn county government, and we do not have to raise the property tax rate. We are going once again and staying at the property tax cap level, and as a result, there will be a 6% decrease in the property tax rate in Erie County. We are seeing assessment growth. Our levy is growing, but because of the property tax cap and the way we've done it, most people will see a reduction in their property tax rate. The Erie County property tax rate will be in 2021, on an average for all the county, $4.43 per thousand, which means if you own a $100,000 house, on the average amount, you'd pay $443 in taxes. It has dropped substantially since even when I took office. We now have one of the lowest county property tax rates in New York State. A lot of people like to point to Erie County taxes being high. Well, it's not the county taxes that are high. You might have other taxes you pay, but it's not the county taxes. And if you did a comparison to all the other Western New York counties, we are much better. Our property tax rate is much lower. And to my friend from Monroe County, our property tax rate is much lower than yours too. Erie County property tax rate over time. As you see in this graph, it shows that during my administration, we have not seen an increase in the property tax rate. We've actually seen a decrease in the property tax rate. The property tax rate dating back to 2000s in the Dennis Gorski era at one point was $5.60. It dropped down during the Giambra years to a little less than $4.40 per thousand. It did jump up dramatically for the 2006 budget year as a result of the red green fiscal crisis to help balance the budget back then. There was a slight increase in the property tax rate during the first year of the Chris Collins administration, but since then we've held the line on taxes. We have not raised the property tax rate, and we are now lowering it to one of the lowest rates it's been in decades. Once again, we stay below the New York State property tax cap, and the tax cap growth allowed for 1.56% of growth, which is about $7.5 million, correct? Yeah. It's good when you have the budget experts standing by who can confirm. So here's some example properties across the county to show you what their property tax would be for 2021 as compared to 2020. Town of Lancaster, Schilling Court, this house, Zillow estimate $355,000, $356,000 is an assessed value in 2020 of $245,000, a preliminary value for 2021 of $328,000. They actually will see a reduction in their property taxes of the county by about $30. Change in equalization rate, 23%. I'm not going to go into too much detail on equalization rate, but it's how we basically guarantee that someone in Lancaster is being treated the same as someone in Buffalo, Tonawanda, and so forth. It's a very complicated formula, but it guarantees that there's fairness in the tax system. Town of Boston, Lower East Hill Road, property value $340,000 on the market value, assessed value $230,000. The county taxes in 2020 were $1,303.47, and now they're going to be $1,242.98. Change in equalization rate of -1. Once again, not going to get into equalization rate. It's a very complicated formula, but it does provide fairness in the system. Here's another one, Barbados Drive in the town of Cheektowaga, $213,000 market value, assessed value $148,100. They paid $790.49 in property taxes last year. They'll pay $780.41 in property taxes for 2021. So for many individuals out there, they will see a property tax reduction. 90% of our budget is mandated. Most people think our budget is the parks, the libraries, Sheriff's Road Patrol, emergency services, my office. Well, all those things I talked about really aren't mandated. But these are the mandated programs, starting with Medicaid, family assistance, child welfare. The vast majority of funding for Erie County government goes to the services that are on the screen. We are required to provide these services. We are not required to provide everything. We do provide additional services. We don't have to have parks, but we have parks because that supports our community's standard of living. We don't have to support arts and cultural institutions, but we do that to support our community standard of living. These are the things we have to support, and 90% of the budget goes to that. We really can't cut from those areas. We're required to provide the service regardless if we cut the jobs, so there's not a lot that we can do there. New York State also passed on some additional costs to us this year. About $2 million has to be provided for mental competency examinations under the 730 clause, as they call it, under the mental health laws. We have to pay that this year. We have to transfer a portion of our sales tax to fiscally distressed hospitals under a new rule from New York State, which comes out to $4.3 million. And then, of course, the state is withholding 20% of owed payments across the board and have cut future payments with regards to state programs, but we're still got to provide programs. So we're paying the price because of this state fiscal condition that they're in. As I noted, last I heard, the state had a $14 billion budget deficit. It's not pretty on the state level. We're not as bad, thankfully, as what we thought we might be because of the sales tax rebounding, but it's still tough because we have these additional mandates that we have to implement. We're responding to COVID. The CARES Act funding expires as December 30th, and any money that we haven't expended has to be reimbursed to the federal government. So we're expending money. But that doesn't mean we can hold it over for the next year. We've created a $20 million COVID-19 local share response fund in the current budget, or I should say the 2021 budget, which will be used for contact tracing, testing, PPE distribution, and the like. 75% of that we believe is FEMA eligible right now, as long as the federal declaration of disaster exists. If the federal government takes away the federal disaster for COVID-19, then we can no longer seek reimbursement from FEMA on it. But we do have $20 million in this proposed budget for COVID-19 response, because we're going to have to respond even if the federal government doesn't come up with an aid package. Parks. Our parks have seen greater usage this year than they had in decades, as long as anyone can remember. Hundreds of thousands of people in the parks this year. They're more popular than ever. We provided $3.1 million in additional capital funding for the Parks Department for 2021 to help with infrastructure costs in the parks. And we always remind everybody there's great things that you can do in the parks, including a Sunday morning hike led by local park rangers through our Erie County Parks Department. You go to erie.gov/parks. You can find out where the next hike is going to be. Last week, I believe it was 18 Mile Creek Park. The week before that, it was the Forest. We've got so many parks that people love to enjoy, and we want people to get out and enjoy it. And this Sunday morning, go for a hike. Go to erie.gov/parks and find out where the park ranger-led hike is going to be. The Parks Department wanted and needed more staff because of the increased usage of the parks. They didn't get it. They didn't get cut, though. But they were seeking more positions because of the increased usage. We were unable to meet that request. But we're going to continue at the current level. Continue our commitment to cultural institutions. Based on my proposed budget from last year, arts and cultural funding is being held flat. No payments have been withheld to arts and cultural institutions this year due to COVID-19. Everyone's received their payment. Every organization has received their payment. We'll be continuing the same level of funding for Visit Buffalo Niagara, for the convention center, though that is questionable as to whether or not they're going to be able to continue at the same level that they did in the past, because they really have had very few events at the convention center this year. But arts and cultural funding is being held flat from my proposed 2020 budget. I know, having talked to legislators, there will be discussions with regards to potential other funding as they get their crack at the budget. But there are no cuts across the board. So even though we had a 5% cut across the board in Erie County government offices, we did not do a 5% cut to arts and cultural funding, because that would have a negative impact on our quality of life and probably led to many more layoffs. So with regards to the proposed budget, it is a fiscally responsible budget that provides for important services, including continuing our COVID-19 response. It reduces the tax rate down to $4.43 per thousand from $4.71 per thousand, the largest tax rate cut in decades. It once again stays under the New York State imposed tax cap. It funds new mandates from the state, including an intercept on our sales tax for fiscally distressed hospitals. And it continues desperately needed funding for arts and cultural institutions, including the Buffalo Zoo, the Science Museum, and all the smaller organizations that exist, down to Hull House in Lancaster, the Buffalo Niagara Village in Amherst, things like that. Now, I am going to move into the COVID-19 update for today. It's not going to be as big or as long as what you normally see, but there's important information to bring out. So, as of the close of business yesterday, so to speak, there were 12,207 total positive cases in Erie County out of 484,290 specimens tested. 708 people have died. That was 2 more from last week's presentation. These are all lab confirmed cases. There are no presumed positives. On September, that's wrong. That should be October 13th, there were 48 individuals admitted to Erie County hospitals for COVID-19. 14 individuals were in the ICU, and 11 individuals had an airway assist. We'll get to that graph in just a second. There's something concerning going on, at least as I see it, in that not only has Erie County seen an increase, but the other counties have seen a big increase. We've heard of an outbreak in Cattaraugus and Chautauqua and hospitalizations there. But there's 48 people hospitalized in Erie County hospitals as of October 13th, and there's 73 throughout all of Western New York. In Western New York, remember, for the designation under New York State is Erie County, Niagara County, Chautauqua County, Cattaraugus, and Allegheny. It does not include Genesee. It does not include Wyoming. It does not include Orleans. This is very rare to have seen such a large proportion of overall cases being made up by counties outside of Erie. So something's going on in the more rural counties. And I'm asking media to find out what's going on. I know P.J. Wendell in Chautauqua County noted they had an issue and there were some hospitalizations, but these numbers are much higher than they should be for all of Western New York. And you can see in the graph what is a line going upwards. There's no doubt about it. There's an increase, and it's increasing, especially over the last week. Now, Erie County has seen a little increase, but not to the same percentage increase that we're seeing in the other counties. 48 individuals were hospitalized on the 13th. 14 are in the ICU. That number has stayed fairly static over the last week. We are seeing an increase in the number of patients requiring an airway assist in Erie County, which is a ventilator. So there's 14 individuals in ICU on the 13th. 11 of them required a ventilator. That's a higher percentage than we've seen recently. So that means there's some very sick individuals in local hospitals. We do not receive from New York State the numbers with regards to how many people are on a ventilator in the other counties. There are 18 individuals in total in Western New York as of the 13th who were in ICU, so that means there's 4 individuals in ICUs in the other counties. But there's a lot of other patients that are being admitted to hospitals in the other 4 counties that are suffering from COVID-19. Now, we reached out to hospitals in the past week to determine, are people coming in sick with COVID-19, or are they coming in after an auto accident and we're determined to have COVID-19 but we're asymptomatic? And with the response we got from the hospitals is 80% of the individuals are coming in sick with COVID-19. There is a small portion of it, about 20% or so, that are asymptomatic. They test them when they come in. Let's say they had a heart attack and they need hospitalization. They test them, they find out the person is asymptomatic, or at least wasn't going to the hospital because they were sick with COVID-19. But the vast majority of individuals who are entering hospital, approximately 80% of them from the data that we have from Erie County, are individuals who are sick with COVID-19. It's not asymptomatic individuals. And I don't know exactly what's happening in the other counties, but from what I've been able to gather, at least with the County Executive Wendell's statements in Chautauqua, these individuals were entering hospital because they were sick with COVID-19. So once again, there are 73 hospitalized in Western New York on the 13th, 18 in the ICU, and of those 73, 48 were in Erie County hospitals and 14 were on ICU and in the ICU, and unfortunately 11 are on a ventilator, which is not a really great thing. Our deaths in hospitals have dropped dramatically from where we were earlier in the year, and we have not seen a death, thankfully, in the hospital in the last 6 days. So they're doing a better job of treating people who have COVID-19. Hospitalization by age group, for the 48 patients that were in on October 13th, it's a slight increase from the October 7th of 45, but it encompasses most age groups. 0 to 19 only had 1 individual that was hospitalized. But you see that except for the 65 to 74 age category, it's very similar. So there's almost the same amount of individuals that are age 75 to 84 in the hospital for COVID-19 as there are in the age group of 45 to 54. And you can see the difference between approximately a week ago. By comparison, there were 29 patients on September 21st and 39 patients on September 28th in hospital. So we're seeing an increase as well in the last month of people hospitalized for COVID-19 in Erie County. Erie County responds. We have 3 very important programs going on right now. The Live Well Erie CARES Act Child Care Funding Program. We put an additional $7 million in the child care subsidy assistance. We know a lot of parents are having issues with child care. Many families qualify but are not applying. You can qualify up to 85% of the median income level in Erie County, which means if you're a family of 4, you can make $81,000 a year and still qualify for child care assistance. But not as many people as we thought are applying for it. You must apply soon. Call 858-8953 for more information, or go to www.erie.gov/social services to find out more and apply online. So we want people to take advantage of this. We don't want people to have to quit their job because of child care issues. The Live Well Erie CARES Act Rental and Mortgage Assistance Program has been in effect for a little bit of time now. Up to $10 million is available to assist renters and homeowners who are at risk of being evicted or foreclosed due to loss of income from COVID-19. Anyone, once again, up to that 85% of the state median income level can apply, which means if you're a household of 4, you can make up to $81,000 a year and apply. More than 1,000 have already applied for the program. My understanding is that about 3/4 of them are rental assistance, 1/4 is mortgage assistance. So most of the people who are applying are those who are at risk of being evicted as a failure to pay the rent. Applications are available online at 211wny.org, or you can call 211 and they'll provide additional assistance, including taking an application online or over the phone, but it actually is easier if you do it online. It'll certainly take you a lot less time than talking to someone on the phone. But if you don't have the ability, because you don't have internet access, you can call 211 and actually apply online. And then the big program we announced this week, the Erie County Back to Business Grant Program, up to $20 million is available to assist small businesses hurt by COVID-19 pandemic. If you're a sole proprietor, you can qualify for up to a $10,000 grant. If you have between 2 to 25 employees, you can qualify for up to a $25,000 grant. And if you have between 26 and 50 employees, once again determined a small business, you can qualify for up to $45,000 in grant assistance. Applications will be accepted through November 2nd, but it is imperative that you apply as soon as possible. You can apply at www.backtobizgrants.org. We are working with 43 North, and I want to thank 43 North for their great work. They'll be reviewing the applications. It's a very fair process. They're going to determine who qualifies based on the restrictions in place. A lot of businesses in Erie County will qualify. We know already that many businesses have qualified. I'll have a better number tomorrow, but I know I think it was a couple hundred had already applied, I should say, not qualified. A couple hundred had already applied, and we are talking about just announcing this program on Monday. So I'm expecting that thousands will apply when all is said and done. It takes about an hour to do the application process, but it's worth it. It can help save a business, especially a sole proprietorship. It can help keep employers, have their employees employed. It can pay for costs associated with PPE, rental, utilities, pretty much anything in your business that's a legitimate business expense can be paid for if you show that you were hurt as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. And we want businesses to apply. There's also another portion of this program you'll be seeing as we go through the winter, which is reminding everybody to shop local. Every dollar that you spend locally will go into the account of a local business paying their employees, paying the salaries and other costs associated with the business being here in Erie County. If you buy something online and you're buying it from a business in Virginia or North Dakota, the county will receive sales tax from it, but we don't receive their full benefit. Shop local, that's another portion of the Back to Business program that we'll be talking about. It's not included in the $20 million grant. $20 million is specifically set for the Back to Business program, but I want people to understand that we're working on all aspects of this to try to ensure that we get through the global pandemic as best as possible and do what we need to do to prepare for the future. As I've said before, Erie County leads the way in so many different ways that we've led the way with regards to strong budgeting. We did not see a decrease in our credit rating like unfortunately many of my fellow county colleagues have. Credit rating agencies said that Erie County took it seriously, did not expect a huge windfall from the federal government to bail us out, did not deficit finance, which a number of other counties have done, which means they're borrowing money to pay for expenses today. And that's all debt they have to pay for in the future. We did not do that. We utilized our resources in a fiscally conservative manner, and as a result, we were not dinged by the credit rating agencies. We've been leading the way with regards to the COVID-19 pandemic response, and we've been leading the way in the budget. I want to thank the budget team for the great work that they've done. It was not easy. It was the most difficult budget that I've been involved in with as county executive, and truthfully, the most difficult budget since, truthfully, the Red Green fiscal crisis when I was elected to be the county comptroller. Because the difficult decisions were actually made before I took office, though there were lots of things we had to do. But the Giambra administration and the legislature cut services, as you remember, and raised taxes at the end of 2005 for 2006. There were difficult budgets since then, but this is the most difficult budget that any county leader, I think, has had to face in quite some time. I want to thank my partners in county government for the good work that they did in the budget office, as well as department heads and other elected officials who understood the difficulty we were dealing with. If a department did not cut, well, we did cut them. because we had to share the pain, including I cut a job in my office, a managerial confidential position, which is probably the first time that any county executive has cut a position in their office, at least since the red green fiscal crisis, because I wanted people to understand we're taking this seriously. My office is taking it seriously. Erie County government is taking it seriously. We're going to provide the services that you need and you demand in an efficient manner. It's going to be lean next year, but it's not going to be what we could have been facing, which is drastic cuts across the board. With that, I'll open it up to questions. David.
Mr. Executive, could you tell me again?
What is the increase in the property tax levy overall again? How much?
The question was with regards to the property tax levy, what's the increase? It's a $7.5 million increase as a result of assessment growth. The tax rate is being lowered by 28 cents to the lowest tax rate that the county has seen since 2005, and I'll just pull it up on the screen. We are staying below the tax cap, which truthfully very few counties have done, and we're basically providing property tax relief for a number of our citizens. Not everyone will see reduction. There have been some increases in assessed values across the board, but in general, it is a 28-cent property tax rate decrease.
And could you tell me where you've done some layoffs that shakes out to? Where are they coming from? One from your office, but are the other 18, is it all the way across? Is there certain places where it's concentrated more than others?
Well, there's 98 job cuts in the 2021 budget, of which most of those are vacancies in which we have a hiring freeze, and I've reduced the number of new hires as a result of the deficit that we were facing. The sheriff has come up with a plan to reduce headcount in the sheriff's office because of what has basically been a huge reduction in the number of inmates at both the holding center as well as the correctional facility due to bail reform. There's less people that are being admitted, so there's less need for staff.
So does that account for the bulk of those people that are out the door, actually?
The vast majority of the layoff, yeah, I think actually the 19 come from the sheriff's office in different divisions.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So the assessment increases, has that already happened in the previous year, or are we going to see new assessments happening throughout the year to reach that tax levy?
The question is in regards to the assessed value and whether this is, we're projecting future assessment growth based on future revaluations, or is this based on prior reassessments and prior revaluations? It's based on the prior ones. We do not project that a government is going to do reassessment in the future. So even though the city of Buffalo had a change which took effect in 2020, we did not see it in 2020 because our numbers are based on what's basically approved the prior year. So now there's an assessment change in the city of Buffalo that took effect in 2020 that we'll see in 2021. The same thing with the other communities that had assessed value changes, revaluations. Anything that took effect in 2020 as of a certain date, so it was locked in by a particular date, those take effect. Anything that potentially could happen in the future, like I've heard some towns are talking about reassessments in 2021, that is not included.
So if my assessment didn't change between last year and this year, then I can expect to see a lower rate from the county, lower taxes from the county?
The question was, if my assessment did not change, I could expect to see a lower tax rate, and the answer is in all likelihood, yes. There are equalization value changes that sometimes take effect, because when a town does not reassess, they have to change the equalization rate. Once again, very complicated formula. So in all likelihood, you will see a reduction if your assessed value stayed the same.
When you make the decision to lower the tax rate during a year when obviously you have fiscal struggles, is that in part because you expect the towns and villages to raise their property tax rates this year?
The question was, when I make the decision to keep or reduce the property tax rate, even at this time of struggle, is it in part because of what our expected increases on the local rate? And the answer is yes. We could have proposed a budget that went over the tax cap, but I also have to look and say, what can we do? I mean, I think it would have sent a very bad message to the general public that at a time when everyone else is pinching pennies, Erie County decided we're just going to spend. We're going to ignore that it's a tight economy out there. It would send a horrible message. It would have said that, oh, there's government again, spending money that they don't have. So we pinched our pennies too. $81 million worth of pennies. That's a lot of pennies. I wouldn't want to see the Brinks truck that's got to carry $81 million worth of pennies, or trucks. So we pinched our pennies too, because we've already seen a lot of the towns have released their tentative budgets for 2021, and they've had some pretty big tax increases. It's not the budget that I wanted, truthfully, because I would have liked to have funded ErieNet, our broadband initiative. I would have liked to have funded a number of other programs, but we're not going to be able to do that because we just don't have the money to do that. So my goal was to keep services the same, to not cut services, to ensure that we could provide for the arts and cultural institutions and things like that. And we were able to do that, but it required some pain on our end.
Mark, I know for months you've been advocating for the federal government to pass the stimulus bill out of concerns from what you'd be announcing today. What happens now if there's a new stimulus bill that comes through and it helps local governments? How does it get applied to this budget?
Well, the question was, what happens if the federal government actually does pass a stimulus package and additional money is available for local governments like Erie County? I hope it happens, because then we'll actually be able to restore some of the jobs that were cut, the vacancies that were cut in departments that were needed. As I said, our Parks Department is they're kind of running on fumes. They have so many people going to the parks, and they would like to have had more staff. They unfortunately, we can't do that. So there's other things that we'd like to fund. I would certainly like to move forward with ErieNet, and if the federal government is going to pay for costs associated with COVID-19 response, that allows us to use that COVID-19 fund for other purposes, including funding ErieNet. And that's the idea behind the stimulus package, is to provide assistance to local governments so that they did not have to cut across the board, so that they could continue providing services and the other thing that the public wants. I mean, we've heard it all along during the pandemic that people who don't have good internet access are at a huge disadvantage in so many different ways. Well, we want to try to alleviate that. So if we do get stimulus funding, it'll allow us to bring back, whether individuals were laid off, if those jobs are still needed, but also some of the vacancies that were cut. 246 jobs since the beginning of this year. So when you talked about the head count in Erie County, how many jobs there were as of January 1, 2020, were 4,783 jobs. January 1st of 2021, there will be 4,537 jobs. And some of those jobs are needed. There's vacancies that still exist in some departments that we did not cut, such as Child Protective Services. The Child Protective Service caseload has gone down during the global pandemic. But now that kids are returning to school and other things, we're starting to see the Child Protective Service numbers go up. So while they're at a workable limit right now with regards to the global, I should say, Child Protective Services, we do anticipate that we will need to hire more Child Protective Service workers to fill some of these vacancies that exist. So not every vacant job was cut, but the ones that we felt were necessary, we kept. Other ones, they were all eligible for being part of the cut package. Did I want to do it? No. It's just not the budget I wanted. But as I've said before, when you're dealt a hand of cards, you got to play those cards. There's no like throwing in a couple cards back in the pile hoping that you get better cards. You get dealt the cards, that's it. David?
I believe you were talking earlier about how,
Unfortunately, the state has its own fiscal crisis, and they cut back 20% on, I think you called it program aid. I was trying to write it down. If they cut 20% reimbursement for certain programs, what did you do in response? Did you then try and make those programs whole, or did you eliminate certain things? And could you kind of give me an example of something like that?
The question was, if the state reduced program aid by about 20% in certain areas, what do we do? Do we make them whole, or did we cut them ourselves? It's a combination of both. I'll actually turn it over to the budget director and deputy budget director if they want to answer this question. Let me put my mask on first.
if you could provide an example, that might be.
This is Bob Keating, our Director of Budget and Management.
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, with the state cuts, I mean, for example, if you spend $10 or you claim $10 of reimbursement, you normally get $10 of reimbursement. Now we're getting 80% of that. So we spend $5, we're getting 80% of that. So even program cuts don't give us we're just getting 80% of the reimbursement, whatever we choose to claim. So what we did is we set up it's called a contra revenue account, where we expect this amount not to be received in 2021 due to state cuts. So if for some reason the federal stimulus comes through, we won't need that money if the state changes their process. But so far, I've seen nothing that they would change that process.
But is it like to fix a road or to?
No, I mean,
fund
we.
a daycare thing? Or
Well, we've seen it all across the board. We've seen probation programs and mental health and health. Like, we expect them to cut our CHIPS payment for road work. It's all across the board, basically all areas. So we've seen grant money cut, capital money cut. So it's across the board. And
You had to cut then 20%, or
well, again, we set aside like a pot of money to allow the work to still go on as normal, the critical work to still go on as normal, but yet we're not recognizing the full revenue because we know we're not going to receive it.
The problem is there are certain programs that the state provides a substantial amount of assistance to that we still have to provide. And if you notice, the state budget director earlier this year, a couple months ago, maybe 30 days ago, was responding to a county saying, well, we're just not going to do that program anymore because you don't fund it. And his response was, you got to do the program regardless of whether we fund it or not. So it's not easy. I mean, we're in a better shape than some of the smaller counties where they don't have as much staff and they still might have some of the same requirements, but instead of having a staff of 8 or 9 responding to it, they may have only had a staff of 1. So even if we didn't fill a vacancy and now we're down to 7, we still have some staff be able to do the work. If they have 1 person and they don't have the funding to even pay the 1 person, they still have to provide the service.
I have a question about extra road work. We talk to highway superintendents, they say those costs don't go away when you don't do the road work, it gets worse every year. What does this cost down the line for the work that we don't do this year?
The question is with regards to roads and what's the cost for work we don't do this year. We're still investing a lot of money in roads. We've moved lines. $8 million isn't. Last year we spent $9 million on pay-you-go, so straight out of our operating fund. This year we had planned on doing $8 million. We moved it to $3 million, but we're putting $5 million into our capital borrowing account, so it pretty much is the same as we originally proposed. The Erie County does a great job of investing in our road infrastructure. We actually do a better job than I think the towns. Hearing from some of the contractors, they've hardly had any work from town government this year, while Erie County has continued to invest. We've done a very substantial job of investing in our highway infrastructure, which is exceptionally large. You've all heard me say this before. We have 1,200 centerline miles of roads, 2,400 lane miles at least. That's more than the states of Rhode Island, Delaware, and Hawaii each have in total. And I would submit, if you actually did a comparison of how much road work was done this year and what we're projecting to do next year, I think we've actually are going to be doing a greater percentage of roads in 2021 than the towns are doing based on their projected budgets, because some of those budgets are really, really cut down.
Mark,
I think Michael had a question.
over the summer, there was some criticism among some Erie County employees who were receiving exorbitant amounts of overtime. And my question to you is, does this budget, did it take into account any sort of reevaluation when it comes to overtime for certain employees?
The overtime, considering the CARES Act funding expires, the overtime that was accrued is not going to be included. There's overtime available in all budgets, but not like it was at the level because of the CARES Act, allowing for the paying of overtime. Now, we go back to our traditional system, which is they can qualify for comp time by working overtime. And then they could cash that out at a later time. So that's the traditional system. Most people say, oh, you're paying, well, I can't believe you gave overtime for everyone but elected officials. Well, everyone but elected officials is always qualified for overtime. It depended if they were going to get a cash payment in their next paycheck or would go into the comp time, which they could cash out in the future. So that's where we'll be. Anybody else have a question who hasn't asked? Sandy. Then I'll go to Ed.
I actually have a question related to the rising hospitalization numbers. Do you, based on your conversations with other government leaders or just your own education on this matter, do you have any hypothesis as to why we're seeing what are essentially rural numbers that are helping to drive this sharp climb in the hospitalization figures over the past few weeks?
Well, the only thing I could say is what has been publicly talked about, which is it's not a nursing home per se, but sort of an assisted living facility in Chautauqua County where there appeared to be a cluster. And they had some very high numbers among their residents, a few staff, and some of those individuals are hospitalized. We're trying to find out more. It's not always as easy to find out from some of the smaller counties. I know Cattaraugus County had a little bit of an issue. I heard that on the phone calls that we often have at 4 o'clock, the regional boiler room calls, so to speak, with the lieutenant governor. So I think it just goes to show is people are like, well, I live out in the rural areas. I don't have to worry about COVID-19. You have to worry about COVID-19 everywhere. It doesn't matter where you live, urban, suburban, or rural. You face an opportunity to catch COVID-19 from someone else in your community. And that's what we're always trying to spread that message is that we all can do a little better. I mean, I know I could do better. I think we all could do a little better to ensure that we're not catching it or spreading it. I've had 2 COVID-19 tests since my famous mask incident. Both of them came up negative. I'm going to have one on Friday as well, just to make certain that as the time is fully expired and so forth, that I'm still negative. I have no reason to believe I would be positive. I don't have any symptoms. But I think people need to understand there's a reason why we offer testing available. That's why we say call 858-2929 to set up testing. Rapid tests available for certain individuals, especially those associated with school age. If they're sick and they can't go back to school until they get a test. The general PCR test is available, which is they're both diagnostic swabs up your nose. It's not anything, people think if I get the rapid test, it's not the swab, it is the swab. And they actually have to keep it in your nostril longer up your nasal cavity. So those 2 tests I had, I tipped my head back, I closed my eyes, and they put the swab in, and it was there for 5 seconds. David's not enjoying that thought. But that's because they want a good sample. They've got to get a good sample for the rapid test. And once they get a good sample, then they can do the rapid test. If they don't have a good sample, they can't do the rapid test. So we want people to know if you are having the symptoms, call 858-2929. If you're sick, don't go out in general public. Call your doctor. You might have a head cold. You could have COVID-19 because some of the symptoms are similar. And of course, we're entering flu season. I got my flu shot. And hopefully the flu shot will protect me from the strains of flu that are out there right now. Get your flu shot. If Dr. Burstein was here, she'd say get your flu shot. Yeah, we've got COVID-19. We've got the flu. We know how many of us have ever walked into a place where somebody, like a working establishment, and someone is sick. We all raise our hand, probably all of us. We don't want that now because you don't know if that person has the flu, COVID-19, or just a head cold. And when it comes to a respiratory illness, it can be easily passed. And it can be easily passed whether you live in the city of Buffalo or Machias or town of Allegheny or Birdsall in Allegheny County or places in Chautauqua and Cattaraugus County. It's just we want people to understand it doesn't really matter where you live, you can catch it. And the hospitalization increases in these other counties is indicative of it. Ed.
Mark, just a question on the road situation. Are there any major road or bridge projects that you were hoping to do next year that might not happen because of the lean budget?
The question was, are there any major road and bridge projects that we were hoping to do that are not planned? And the answer is really no. On the major projects, we're continuing with projects that will not be finished this year that, like we talked about, Maple Road, that will continue. We'll get basically the 1/2 done this year, and then we'll have to do the other. It's an east-west road, and I think it's the east side that's getting done and the west side. I could be wrong on that, but the major projects are continuing. What we ended up having to do is just reduce some of the what would be considered micro-pave projects, some of the mill and overlay projects. Our Department of Public Works did a lot of projects this year. One thing that we did that a lot of other governments didn't do is we fully funded the projects that we had on the books for this year, because we had the money. A lot of other governments did not. They cut. We didn't, so we've been doing work all year. It's a little lower than I would have liked, but it's not a tremendous cut. Anybody else? Eileen?
I'm sorry, I came in very late, so I apologize if this was already asked. I went back to the property taxes. Who will see an increase? Will it be more City of Buffalo residents? Can you?
The question was, who will see an increase with regards to property taxes? Well, the adjusted rate across the board is going down by 28 cents to $4.43 per thousand, from $4.71 this year, and it was as high as $4.96 in 2016. I can't say who will see it, because usually when they do revaluations and readjustments, what you often see on reassessments is 1/3 go up in a community, 1/3 stay the same, 1/3 go down. I can't say any one particular location will not see a tax increase, and I can't say that one particular location, they'll all see tax decreases. It's based on a formula, an equalization rate, that is very complicated. The standard rate across the board for countywide is $4.43 per thousand. But it's, I'm not going to sit here today and say everyone will see a tax cut, because there have been reassessed values, which of course increase the overall valuation of the house, which is a good thing. You want your house to be worth more. And that means that even though you cut the tax rate, you might theoretically pay more because the valuation is so much more. I can't answer that question as to one area over another. Let me go up.
With the steady rising numbers in COVID, are there still ongoing talks of letting fans into the stadium, or is that?
The question was, with this increasing COVID hospitalization and new case rates, are there any ongoing talks with regards to letting people in the stadium? There's been no talks lately with regards to that. I would think as the hospitalization rate goes up and the case rate continues to hover on a weekly basis over 1%, the discussions I've had with New York State don't indicate that they'll be allowing fans in. Could we do it? We could probably do it with a smaller amount, but remember, if we allowed the 7,000 fans in at a 1% rate, that means that there's 70 people there who probably have COVID-19. They may be asymptomatic. You might be able to do it in such a way that they really, if you're wearing masks at all times, you can protect, but there's no way to 100% ensure that the individuals who walk into a facility at large, even if it's only 10% of the overall amount of people who normally would be in there, is a COVID-free environment. You cannot guarantee it's a COVID-free environment. And with the increased rates, and at one point in the last week, Western New York's was the highest as an average on a 7-day rolling average. We don't have the highest zip code rates. Those are downstate right now. Brooklyn and Queens have some of the highest zip code rates, and the governor's really been focused on that. But if our rates were at some of theirs, like 8 to 10% in a zip code, I guarantee you they would implement the red, orange, yellow system here. We haven't done it yet, thankfully. We haven't gotten to that point. But if we did, I know they would, because they've told us they would. David.
Thank you.
And I'll get to Al.
I appreciate it.
About 15 minutes after you started talking, you talked about the CARES money and how it had to be spent by the end of the year. Take you back to that. You talked about a $20 million fund. My question is, do you have to actually spend that money, or do you have to say, or can you say we plan to?
No.
And can you score a little away, or do you have to right now go on a buying spree and buy up every mask,
A ventilator, anything else you could think of?
The question was with regards to the CARES Act funding that you have to spend by December 30th. You actually have to spend it, or can you say we're planning on spending it in 2021? You have to spend it. And so that's why we have multiple programs in place, not only for our internal costs, but for the CARES Act child care funding, for the CARES Act, the Live Well Erie rental and mortgage assistance program, the Back to Business grant programs.
Is for your broadband, if kids are at home learning?
The question was, can you make a case for the broadband? And I know it's been made to the federal government, and the answer is no.
Hey, you got the answer?
You
No?
can't do what we plan out of the CARES Act funding, because we'd have to spend it by December 30th, and there's no way we'd be able to implement that system. So it has been looked at. And the current president of the National Association of Counties is a colleague of mine, Gary Moore. He's the judge executive out of Boone County, Kentucky, and his big initiative as president of NACO is broadband, expanding broadband, and he's been pushing through his senator, Mitch McConnell, to include expanded broadband in the CARES Act funding, and the answer back from Treasury is you cannot. Al?
And if you are getting towards the end of December, you were talking about, well, if the number of people who qualify for the child care help, you don't get it, then you can switch that over to buying, say, more PPE.
We could, but we have to get the money out real quick.
Right.
We've actually bought a lot of PPE. We have, I think, over 3 million procedural masks on stock right now. We have gowns, we have gloves. Well, nitrile gloves are still not the easiest thing to get, but we've actually done fairly well on that. The N95 is still the holy grail. It's still difficult to get, but we actually do have a few thousands of N95s in stock. We feel that this will get us through the fall and the winter. If we have a big flare-up again like we did in the spring, we're going to have to buy more PPE. So when it comes to the management of the PPE, and I know Bob and Ben especially have been intimately involved working with our purchasing office as well as the Department of Public Works, the Health Department, and Emergency Services. We have a very well-stocked warehouses now, because we have 2 warehouses, one in Amherst and one Cheektowaga. But when it comes to the CARES Act funding, we got to spend it. So if we want to, if in January, February, we're like, oh man, we need more masks, then we're going to have to take it out of the $20 million fund that we're setting up, because we can't use the CARES Act funding anymore. If on December 31st, January 1, there's $15 million left over in the CARES Act funding that hasn't been spent, we got to give it back. That's the rule. And that was the agreement that all communities were required to make with the federal government, is you get this money, but if you don't spend it, you have to give it back. And that's what we would have to do.
The question that I intended to ask, though,
Oh.
is...
Sorry, Al.
The,
He intended to ask another question.
well, it was a follow-up to Dave's, but on the better-than-expected sales tax disbursement from the state, you said it's basically they adjusted the reformulation.
Yes.
I think most of us figure if Erie County gets, $100 million in sales, that is generated by Erie County, that's what you get back from the state. But I guess with the reformulation, we get some from New York because they get so much. How does that work?
Well, the big thing that's really kicked in the past year that didn't exist before 2020 is the internet sales tax. Now, if you live in Erie County and you bought something from someone in Warren County, Franklin County, New York City, you paid sales tax before because it was based in New York State. But if you bought it from Montana, North Dakota, Alabama, there's a good chance you didn't pay sales tax unless the business that you bought it from had business operations in New York State. Well, that changed. There was a Supreme Court case in 2018 or 19 that said no, just because someone's in North Dakota, and it was a North Dakota-based case, doesn't mean you can prevent sales tax from being collected because you're selling to someone in New York. So all those businesses now have to collect sales tax. And as it pertains to Erie County, it's 8.75%, with the first 4% going to New York State, the next 4 3/4 going to Erie County, and then we share that. We share about 46% of the amount that we receive. That's why when you see this pie chart here, you see 424 million retained by Erie County, 349 million shared with local governments. Now, one thing you don't see there is internet sales tax, because it's just thrown into the full sales tax amount. So we don't know what percentage of that money that we received in the third quarter, like here, is based off of sales that were done in Erie County or sales that were done in other areas. Now, we'll find out a little bit at a later time because they do an adjustment over time. So we'll know that, yeah, we got a certain amount of sales from automobile sales, we got a certain amount of sales from retail locally, like the malls, we got a certain amount from restaurants, and then we got a certain amount from internet sales. We don't know exactly that figure yet, but it has made a difference. We all know people have been buying on the internet, and we know now you got to pay sales tax associated with it. One area that was doing very well in the last few months is automobile sales. Been a lot of automobile sales. And I would remind everybody, you got to sell a lot of sweaters at a mall or do a lot of dinners to make up the same amount of sales tax as one automobile sale or lease. So our economy is not where we'd like it. We have seen, of course, job loss, but we have seen growth in areas, and we're doing our best to continue strengthening our economy through our Back to Business grant program, and I certainly hope every business that has an opportunity to take advantage of it does. But we're doing better than we could have been. To give you an example, the first quarter, we were 6% up in our sales tax from 2019. We were actually doing very well in the first quarter. And then COVID-19 hits. Then we were over 18% below in the second quarter compared to 2019. The last quarter, we're
Up 3.7.
3.7% in the third quarter of 2020 as compared to the third quarter of 2019. When all was said and done and calculated, because there was such a huge hit in the second quarter, we're down 2 and 3%. Now, the one advantage is the largest quarter of sales tax as a percentage of overall sales tax, and this is putting on my old controller hat, is the fourth quarter. So if we continue where we are today, it'll help alleviate once again the big loss in the second quarter, which is actually one of the lower quarters.
That's just Christmas, right?
Yeah, the holidays, Christmas shopping, every shopping you can think of. Festivus shopping. I don't think you just air grievances for Festivus. You generally don't shop unless you're buying a new pole.
I have one more question. Do you know how much, can you tell me how much of the surplus or rainy day, whatever you want to call it, how much of that did you have to plug into this budget?
The question was, how much of the rainy day fund did we have to plug in the budget? We put $10 million in, which is going to leave us with a very healthy fund balance still. It's about 10% of the fund balance. We're projecting right now a $400,000 surplus for this year after all the actions that we took to reduce government. So we're not expecting to have a big amount of money to roll over.
So you had 100 million and you used 10?
Yeah, it's around that. Yeah, it's about 104.
Yeah, 103.
103 million. We're planning on using 10. Now, I do know in some other counties, they're planning on using a very sizable amount of their fund balance. But there's a reason why I have a rainy day fund. It's not to plug all the holes, because then you just create an imbalanced budget that has a problem in the out years. And I would remind everybody, as part of our budget, because the fiscal authority still exists, we have to prepare a budget and a 4-year plan that balances. And if you used, let's say you had a $20 million deficit that you plugged all with fund balance, then the next year it's a $30 million deficit, and the year after that it's a $40 million deficit. So what we did is we plugged the $10 million, and based on our expectations for sales tax growth for the next year, if we continue where we are, we would not need to plug additional holes with any sizable amount. It's smart budgeting. The rating agencies don't like it, but they'd prefer that you just raise your property taxes. But I didn't think it was fair for us to just say we're going to go on a spending spree and spend like there's no problems out there. So we did reduce the property tax rate, and we are using $10 million, or projected to use $10 million in fund balance.
Just a quick follow-up on the bills. The governor said that he was going to go visit the stadium. I'm assuming that hasn't happened yet. Do you know if that's still in the plans?
The question was, the governor said he was going to go visit the stadium. Has it happened yet, and is it still in the plans? I can say it has not happened yet. I think it's still in the plans, but the question would be better directed to the governor's office.
You said you don't foresee fans in the stadium. Just for clarification, is that for the foreseeable future? Is that for the season? What do you, I know you don't like to make predictions way too far.
Well, the Bills and I think are on the same page. We don't see them in the stadium for the foreseeable future. Eileen?
The controller is claiming that there were 77 jobs created throughout the year, along with a number of promotions. He's also claiming that that included some of your own family members. How do you respond to that, and specifically with asking for other departments to give back?
Well, the question was with regards to promotions. I mean, if anybody was entitled to a job upgrade because of years of service, they got it. We have a contract. We have to meet the contract. So individuals that were entitled to a job upgrade received that. There was a couple promotions of individuals to positions that needed to be filled. So they may have moved up the ladder, so to speak. That is standard. Just because we have a tough financial budget means I can ignore our labor contracts. I can't do that. I still have to follow our labor contracts. And there were lots of discussions with department heads with regards to what jobs you need to keep that may be vacant today, what ones you need to fill. I mean, last time I checked, the comptroller was still, even if he wasn't bringing his staff back, last I know, most of them are still working from home. He was giving and trying to give upgrades, so kind of a little silly for him to be criticizing upgrades associated with a contract or a promotion where a person moved up because somebody retired when he was, as we all know, trying to give a big upgrade to his own political appointee.
But can you identify who he's talking about, referring to your own family?
I'll deal with that later. I don't know. Michael.
Question regarding COVID. Over the course of the pandemic, folks have been encouraged to go outside, enjoy our parks. As we head into the winter, there's a couple of activities that come to mind that tend to draw crowds, like Santa Fest over Chestnut Ridge. Are there any that, or perhaps it's premature, are there any that might be in jeopardy at this point in light of COVID?
Well, the question was, are there things like Santaland and Winterfest that might be in jeopardy as a result of COVID? Yeah, they're all in jeopardy, and it's less because of wanting to bring people in there. It's because of the thousands that attend. We did cancel Fall Fest this year. Fall Fest would have been held, if not this week, the week before, at Como Lake Park. That was canceled. Right now, Santaland and Winterfest are still on the books, but it's going to be tough to do that because they're such a big draw. We usually get thousands, not just hundreds, but thousands. And I don't see how we could foreseeably bring in thousands of people, even if it's outdoors, in a situation like that. They're still on the books, but I'm doubtful. Ed, last question.
I want to get your thoughts on the Canadian border. The Canadians announced they don't have any plans to open anytime soon. Of course, that means a lot of shoppers don't come over here. People don't go back and forth. How much of a worry is that for you that may stay closed through the Christmas season and into next year?
The question was with regards to the Canadian border being closed and how much of a worry is that with regards to the Christmas season and Canadian shoppers coming across. It's not as big a worry as it was 10 years ago when the Canadian shoppers made up a much larger proportion of the overall retail sales locally. They make up a much smaller proportion now. It's an issue, but it's not I think it's not as big an issue as, say, someone who has family in Canada that they want to go visit and haven't been able to visit, or they have a summer home, which they normally would have been summered at in Sharkston or Crystal Beach, that they couldn't go across. I think it's more of an issue, especially for the families, the ones that have not been able to see their loved ones like they normally would. I'm not talking about someone in a nursing home. I'm just talking about they may have a sister or a brother that lives in Southern Ontario, that the sister and brother can't come to here and they can't come to Southern Ontario. So it is a concern. I've had conversations with our partners in the federal government about it, but your question was accurate that it does not appear that the Canadian government is going to be opening up the border anytime soon to what would be considered non-business travel. There is business travel going on. So if somebody is shipping goods across the border, it is allowed. If somebody works in Southern Ontario or lives in Niagara Falls, Ontario, and works in Niagara Falls, New York, they are allowed to travel across the border, but only for their work. So it's an issue, but it's not as big a concern as it would have been 10 years ago. Thanks everyone for tuning in. It was a little longer than usual. We had a lot to talk about. I want to thank Kendra Schmidt for the last hour and 10 minutes of providing American Sign Language, which is very important for those who may have a hearing issue. And as always, be safe and well and wear your masks when you can't safely socially distance everyone. Take care. Be well.